afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to present to you all today, and thank you for having me at this conference. I'll just do got to do both. So I'll just do a quick overview of the presentation roadmap. Firstly, I'll start with a quick introduction into green finance. And secondly, using the example of my dissertation research examining finance within green housing, I'll highlight why it pointed to the need for new ways to communicate complex green finance knowledge. Thirdly, I'll explore two music-based approaches developed in my dissertation, presenting this knowledge in more accessible and engaging ways. Then I'll detail potential pathways for future research. And finally, at the end of the destination, that sentence didn't make sense, but the end destination will be a performance of part of a song I wrote backed by literature and research. So, defining green finance. Green finance is defined as the creation of financial opportunities that bring both a decent rate of return and environmental benefit and deliver greater accountability. And these opportunities are centred around debt-based investments that are then turned into financial assets. And it's essentially about just greening economic growth. So, green finance is integral to building the road for climate action, especially with research highlighting how $125 trillion of climate investment is needed by 2050 to meet net zero, requiring increased action across private investors enabled by public ambition for policy and public investment. So green finance not only addresses SDG Goal 13, climate action, but also 17, partnership for the goals, as generating investment depends on partnerships between public, private and not-for-profit sectors. However, the vast majority of financing decisions for climate action do not explicitly consider social risks or social dialogue needed in a just transition. And Adrian Bullitt strongly explores how many green finance operations lack transparency and neglect the social risks, creating injustice. So this highlights the need to critically analyse green finance and find new ways to communicate research widely to enable more social dialogues that hold finance accountable. So how are these ideas reflected in my undergrad dissertation? So related to SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, my dissertation critically explores how finance is shaping the future of green housing in Leeds, with a particular interest in understanding how recent demands for green investments translate into the world of green housing. So it mapped and analysed investment flows, the investors and their incentives within the financing of a private sustainable housing development. So some of the key findings were that it uncovered foundations for future climate injustice in housing funded by private green finance, but also the potential for climate justice via community financing. So large private equity, with their financial flows very difficult to track, prioritise short-term competitive green investment returns and profits for shareholders via private shares and dividends, forms of financial assets, resulting in ecological but unaffordable housing. On the other hand, community land trusts prioritise long-term goals of affordable green community housing via community shares, which are financial assets held in the interests of local people, and this results in ecological and affordable housing accessed by Leeds residents. So all of that was really, really complex and maybe a bit boring if you don't like finance as much as me, weirdly. So research as this could have huge implications for the future of green housing in Leeds through highlighting the need for private green finance reforms and for the scaling up of fairer funding alternatives like community shares. However, the complexity of the financial knowledge and academic theories underpinning this research makes it difficult for the wider dialogue around the social risks to happen. So this creates a rift between knowledge and action. And in the case of my research, communicating the importance of community shares could be integral to gaining more localised support for financing changes to ensure that future housing in Leeds is both ecological and affordable, closing this gap. And this inspired the use of a more creative presentation style than traditional dissertations, which aimed to widen its impact and help close the gap between the knowledge and action. So I argue encouraging more creativity within the communication and education of these complex issues is essential to transforming green finance from issue-based to action-based. While the value of using creative approaches was also inspired by literature, It was mostly inspired by my personal interest in music, and developing these two approaches that I used has helped me overcome academic challenges within the research and writing process. So, further development of these approaches could translated into classrooms could help address SDG4, quality education, and 10, reduced inequalities. And this is particularly because more creative approaches in general could have a positive impact to empower more students to engage with these complex ideas, both at undergraduate level, postgraduate, just everyone. But in particular, it could really benefit neurodivergent students, so like myself, in providing alternatives to traditional educational approaches that can play to their strengths, such as more creative ways of thinking and like big picture thinking that a lot of traditional classrooms don't really address, and so that people of all learning styles are empowered to engage in action. So the first creative approach was inspired by how I'd link music to the complex Marxist geography theory underpinning my dissertation to help me better understand it. So as a result, subsections of the literature review and analysis section are structured using lyrics to draw out dense concepts in more engaging and accessible ways. And Villanueva highlights the value of using hip-hop as a communicative tool for social justice education and activism, as it provides students with a more engaging and culturally relevant forms of accessing knowledge. And this is rooted in a critical consciousness approach developed by Freire, where students are empowered to connect their individual experiences and perspectives to structural forms of oppressions in their education, with the view of challenging them. So linking concepts to lyrics of songs that I thought were relevant not only enhanced my understanding, but has also inspired me to use them as a communicative tool for change, which is why I'm here today. And the second approach is writing research back to music. So a song backed by the research and literature was written to draw out the key but dense concepts in the research in more accessible, engaging ways. But in this way, it also provides more of an overview of the ideas. This approach was inspired by the work of Banginalan et al. And in collaborating with local musicians, they produced a concept album communicating research on the impacts of the Philippine drug war on communities in Manila. And doing this made findings more accessible to the affected communities, but also fostered interdisciplinary collaboration between researchers, musicians, photographers. They did like live shows, so all sorts of people in the arts were involved. And additionally, writing this song and continuing to write theory back to music has also helped improve my academic writing, has been a source of motivation for me to keep pushing for change. This research is still in its early planning stages, so I've only developed a working aim for it so far. So to develop new creative and inclusive interdisciplinary music-based research and educational approaches for enhanced climate action linked to finance. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll probably work on that. So while the focus would be music, because music is inherently linked to other forms of art, it could also be broadened out to the wider arts. So I've got three working research objectives. So the first is developing ways to incorporate music in the teaching and mainstream communication of green finance research. So for this objective, I'd probably work on creating a clearer methodology based on my dissertation, so students and educators could implement music in their work on green finance in the future. Designing and delivering music-based educational participatory workshops on green finance to co-create new music and knowledge. So Loyola Hernandez and Gazal in their Decolonizing the Curriculum report highlight the value of embedding music in environmental pedagogies and argue that arts can help break the dichotomy of what is knowledge and who are knowledge producers. So given that the scope of the people who can contribute to valid forms of financial knowledge is very limited, using participatory workshops in this space could be very valuable in challenging that. And then the third is fostering increased collaboration between the music industry and researchers to produce music communicating knowledge. And this could entail, like for me at least, being an intermediary person between musicians and creatives and general researchers to facilitate the transfer of knowledge for more interdisciplinary collaboration. We're at some crossroads now. So with humanity at the crossroads of climate inaction or catastrophe, I can see three clear paths. The first is we don't do justice to those affected by the past songs of climate change and inaction. The second, where we go down a path towards humanity's greatest hits tour with current unjust and ineffective approaches to climate action. Or the third, the one I hope we pick, where we enter a new creative direction and continuously and collaboratively create new research-backed songs of eco-hope and climate action. And now I'm going to perform a song said no one ever at a research conference.
Going green is all the rage. Money talks to sway corporate ways to spend their gains to create a change. But underneath the surface of money circuits, see their ways a system breaking. The researchers say green facades and smoky screens lead us into believing we can reach a world of dreams with big money in the driver's seat. The road they lay so short-sighted, it's paved with green intentions. Course of burning hell. Green facades and smoky screens fraying slowly at the seams, 'cause a world of dreams is in our reach with nature in the driver's seat, where people build a fairer road leading us so safely home before we're out of time. Hope is on the climb. See a change start to rise.